What was your most horrifying encounter with another human? Was riding my bike to school taking the bike trail when I noticed a guy leaning against a light post, thought nothing of it since I've taken this trail pretty much every day throughout high school. Anyway, I'm riding and things go dark. Turns out as I passed by the guy pistol whipped me, woke up to him trying to take my feet out of the straps of my bike. He notices I'm awake and immediately points his gun at me asking me to hand my bike over. I resisted at first telling him that my mom had just bought it for me after begging so long for it. He took it anyway. Still bugs me to this day. Edit, didn't expect my story to take off. Some minor details for people wondering. The bike was a Dawes SSTL, I was 16 at the time, I'm 23 now. I had clipped pedals at the time, which is why he was struggling to take my feet out. I live in a not so nice area where stuff like this is not uncommon. Fontana/Rialto, CA. The guy had face tats and dressed like a thug. He would stick out like a sore thumb riding a competitive fixed-gear bicycle. I'm sure he stole it to sell rather than personal use. I also called the police and they came over to file a report. I didn't notice I had blood going down my ear, probably adrenaline, till the cop pointed it out. He took pictures of the split in my head for the report. If anyone knows if the police station or county keeps reports like this on file for a while, I would be happy to try and get the pictures and police report. My ex-girlfriend was verbally abusive. After I said that we were breaking up, she walked into the kitchen. I had no idea why, but I was terrified. She came out with something behind her back. I bolted out of her house and went home. Never went round again. Edit, thanks for all of your support. I'm so glad that I'm not alone in this and that other people have gone through the same. Also, for the person that called me a pussy and the people that are saying that I should have seen what she had first, I'm going to guess that you have never been in an abusive relationship. When you've been abused by someone, they start to seem inhuman. My ex was 6-inch and really strong. She never showed any sort of regret even though she ended up putting someone in the ER with a broken nose. I'm 5'1" and really weak. We are both girls BTW. Getting into a physical fight with her and a knife is basically suicide. Last year I moved from a dense urban area to a really pretty, underpopulated rural one. I got super into trail running. There's a big, circular route that I like a lot in the local nature preserve, and over the summer I was on an early morning run there when I passed a dude sitting on a rock slightly off the trail. He looked exceedingly normal, street clothes, hat, boots etc., and I figured him for a hiker. All good. So I make my way down the path, around, uphill and to this nice overlook, where I usually stop to drink from the fountain. It's when I'm bent over at the fountain that I hear a twig snap, and I straighten up to see that guy, crouched over and stepping through the woods off the clearing like he's trying to creep up on me. I bolted. The sprint back was the most terrifying experience of my life, obviously. I don't know if I lost him or if he gave chase at all. The police never found anyone matching his description, and I don't run anywhere near there anymore. Edit, if you'd like to be creeped out further, the police said he had most likely seen me before and been stalking me for an indeterminate period, i.e. he was camped out front to see whether I'd show, then cut across to the spot where he knew I always stopped. I'd probably seen him before without realizing it. He might know where I live. I was driving through a somewhat rough neighborhood at night, late after a movie, and while sitting at a light we saw this guy in a beat-up car take a bump of cocaine next to us. We make eye contact. As the light turns green he merged behind us and then proceeds to follow us around flashing his lights and honking his horn for several blocks. We pull up to another red light, he pulls up next to us yelling at us to roll down the window. Turns out he just wanted to let us know we had a tail light out and then drove away. My first apartment was part of a complex that was U-shaped with a large grassy area in the middle. The neighborhood kids would run around and play in the grass a lot. One day I was sitting on my stoop talking on the phone when one of the kids fell over, grabbed his foot and started crying. He was maybe 5 or 6. He had stepped on a bottle cap and sliced open his foot. I took him inside, had him sit on the edge of the tub, washed his cut and put some Neosporin on it and a band-aid and sent him on his way. A few hours later there is a knock on my door. When I answered, a massive skinhead with a tattoo of a pentagram on his neck was standing there with his chest out. The boy was peeking around one of his giant thighs pointing at me. He stuck his finger in my chest and yelled, "Did you take my boy in your fucking house? That's my son. Did you give him a fucking bath? Look at his foot." I shrieked. He cut his foot. I washed the cut. He inspected the kid's foot, then asked me what exactly happened. I stumbled through the story. Then he just said, "All right then." He shook my hand with a vice grip and I never saw him or his son again. Went down to the local creek with my friend. We were probably 10 or so. The local creepy teenager shows up, drunk out of his mind. I immediately knew this was bad. He mumbles something under his breath, and I looked at my friend with the "we need to get the fuck out of here" look. He stepped closer towards us and another guy, older and probably twice the size, ran up and grabbed him. He told us to go home and not come back. Later the creepy guy was involved in a robbery that turned into murder. And I still feel so thankful to the other guy who was there. Me and my boyfriend came back at like 2 a.m. from a night out. We were both quite drunk and stumbled into the hallway to the elevator when we see drops of something on the floor. It definitely was blood. Fresh and wet. The elevator button and door were covered in bloody handprints as well. My boyfriend called the elevator, pushing me aside not knowing what would be in it. Luckily nothing except for a puddle of blood. The elevator came from the 5th floor. So we went investigating. The trail of blood ended at a door with huge hand smears of blood on the door. It took all our courage to ring, not the nicest place to live, robbery. But I am so glad we did. An elderly man opened the door. He looked like straight out of a horror movie. Covered in blood from head to toe. His gray sweater was red. His hair was wet. His shoes were filled with blood. We immediately sobered up. I called an ambulance which arrived in 2 minutes. My BF went inside the flat helping the man sit down. There was so much blood, I have never seen that in my life. We didn't know what happened to him until we met him yesterday properly for the first time. Recognized my BF's glasses. He was drunk, wanted to ride his bike home, crashed somehow and got a huge cut on his head. He takes heart medicine which thins his blood, that's why he lost so much. If we wouldn't have rung the doorbell he would have bled to death. He actually gifted us money and a super expensive bottle of champagne for something completely self-explanatory. When I was 13, I just got dropped off from the school bus, so I had a bit of ways to walk home. As I get close to the corner of my street, some guy in a dark blue car rolls up and asked where I was headed. Told him I was going home. The guy excruciatingly slowed his car down to match my walk and asked if I wanted a ride home. I told him no thanks, I'm almost home. Then he continued to ask where I live and if I still wanted a ride home. Luckily I had a phone at this age, and pulled out my Nokia phone, why I remember this, and pretend to call my mom. She wouldn't have picked up the phone and I was almost home. The guy saw what I was doing and sped off like crazy. From the age of 13, I started carrying pepper spray. I spent a few months when I was 16 hanging out with some organized crime guys in my hometown. Dudes had Uzis in their trunks, and people didn't fuck with them. One night I went with a younger one, mid-20s, on an errand. I wasn't told what for, but he started driving to a bad part of town and told me I was going to help him take care of something. I got out at a stoplight and started walking. Something wasn't right. I never spoke to those dudes again. I was pretty sure at the time I was going to get killed, or help kill someone. In retrospect, I was probably just on a beer run or maybe sent to go pick up some money from a gambler or something. But at the time, I was convinced I was going to be a part of, or a victim to a major crime. Late 80s, was running errands in town with my mum and 2 sisters. Back then it wasn't uncommon to leave your kids in the car while you ran inside the store. We are sitting in the car waiting, and then I see an older guy walking towards our car. I just get a really bad feeling and start yelling at my sisters to lock the doors, while I lock the 2 on my side. He comes over and spends the next couple of minutes trying to open all the doors on the car while we are cowering in our seats. Eventually he gave up and left. We were all 8 and under in age at the time. I just knew that if he got in the car he would take one of us. I had just spent a fantastic Saturday evening at a friend's house to celebrate his birthday. Beer begot beer, and then somehow single malt whiskey pushed its way into the party. I left his house at about 12:30 a.m. and caught a tram home. The tram was crowded enough that I needed to stand near the door. Sometime around halfway home the tram stopped at a station, and I looked up from the book I was reading, to see some enraged guy charging across the tracks, yelling as he came towards me. Because my blood was somewhere around 20% Scotch, it took me a while to realize that he was running across the tracks towards me specifically. I heard him yell, I saw his saliva splatter on the tram door. He punched the tram door twice. Really hard. Thankfully the tram doors do not open on the other side while it is stopped at the station, TIL. As the tram began to depart he still held on for a few seconds while some of the other folks on the tram, safe in the knowledge he couldn't get in, started to tease him. Incidentally, they called him a prawn, which was not an insult I'd heard before. I have no idea who he was, or what provocation he perceived. Or what he would have tried if he'd opened the doors. Naturally, once the tram left him behind I tried to just kind of stand there, looking unperturbed. It was only the next morning that I thought how much worse that situation may have ended up if either A, the tram door had opened, or B, I had been walking past this guy instead of on public transport. I was 18 and I was coming home after doing a job interview. I finally came up on my street and an older man came out from behind a tree and asked me where a street was. Right away I got creepy vibes from him and I said, "Sorry, I don't know where that is," and as I was crossing the street he slowly turned around and said in the most creepy way, "Hey, do you want to hang out?" I quickly said, "No." And speed walked to my house, and the whole time I was scared he saw what house I walked into and that he knew where I lived. I was about 14-15. School had just ended so the bus home was packed with other school kids too. We were a couple stops away from where everyone got on when this guy with a huge jacket, hood up and mask on, we were in the middle of a heatwave so super odd, got on the bus, stormed upstairs past me and my friends and threw down this huge bag he was carrying. He screamed, "This is a bomb," and ran off the bus. It took everyone a few seconds to process what just happened, but after those few seconds I experienced the most crazy panic I've ever seen. Everyone bolted downstairs and tried to get out, but the doors were closed. I remember this huge black dude just punched the glass out of the door like it was nothing and people were just dragging themselves through it. When I got to the door I hit the emergency release to make it easier to jump off. Once we were out we sprinted at least 500 m down the road and crouched for the explosion. Except there was no explosion. It was just a hoax. Turns out that the guy that did it was someone from my school that had previously been expelled. TLDR, a kid threw a fake bomb on a bus and terrified everyone. I was robbed. Guy did not actually pull out his gun. He pulled up his shirt and showed me he had a gun. I gave him my money, he wanted more and actually pulled out a knife, instead of the gun, and threatened me with it. I took a step back and pulled out my Glock and threatened him with it. There was a tense standoff where he moved his hand like a millimeter at a time towards his gun. He then dropped the knife and ran away. Funny thing is like 6 to 7 of the 820s in his pocket fell out on the ground. Was walking through campus after a night class, around 9 or 9:30 p.m. It's a big campus, UCF, and pretty empty at this point. The shuttle I took was at the other end of campus so it was a pretty long walk. At one point I'm walking through a swampy area with a raised boardwalk. There are two girls a ways ahead of me walking together. I see them reach the end of the boardwalk and go into the next building. As I reach the end of the boardwalk, this guy kinda hops up out of nowhere / the surrounding woods. Takes my hand and starts telling me how beautiful I am, what's my name, what year am I at uni, what am I doing tonight, where do I live. I ask him why he wants to know and he says, "I'm taking a survey." I'm literally in such shock that it takes me a second to realize he's even touching me / has my hand. Everything he was asking me sounded really unauthentic and like it was scripted, like he was in a rush to get everything out. He also had this really weird, unsettling vibe that he was giving off that instantly freaked me out, but it was dark outside, and I was all alone at this point. Thankfully, a minute or two later a guy walks out through the building, and I use that moment to break my hand away from the weirdo and tell him, I have to go. I've never walked so fast to my shuttle and looking over my shoulder the whole time. I couldn't stop shaking the whole ride home. Something about that guy was off and I was sure if that man hadn't have come out when he did that something bad would have happened to me. Exactly what, I don't want to think about. Keep in mind there had been a group of two girls walking ahead of me and he hadn't approached them. He was looking for a girl by herself.